Views and news on Cape Talk.
Welcome back. It's a big appointment. We couldn't have it last week because the doctor was out on the beach in Italy, I believe.
I
Time for us
wasn't
to
on the
connect with the naked
beach.
scientist.
I
You
was
weren't-
not on
you
the
were
beach.
on a beach.
I was working, Clarence. It was a conference actually. I was in Turin. It wasn't quite as exotic as on the beach, but we did have a very nice pizza. But no, I was out there for a colleague who runs a big research consortium across Europe. She's training early career scientists in various aspects of paediatric cancers, and they're doing important research in how we diagnose early and treat cancers. But what she wanted to do was what we do here on the programme on Fridays, which is get people communicating and talking about science better. So that's what we were doing. We're actually helping early career scientists to become as good a communicators as they can be.
No, I hear what you're saying. I just wanted to convince everybody that you've got a life and that you were there on the beach. But now, okay, you've ruined that occasion.
Sorry.
But it does. It's all okay. Let's get us on the road with one of the voice notes in.
Hi, Clarence. I have a question for Dr. Chris. It's regarding intuition. How come other people have it and others don't? I find to have understanding of things I did not have prior knowledge of, but when a question is posed and it doesn't make sense, I'd find that I understood and explained something I did not have prior knowledge of. I've also noticed you, Dr. Chris, at some instances you explain something according to your understanding.
Intuition is, I guess, the question, Dr. Chris Smith.
He's hit the nail on the head, hasn't he? In the sense that while we don't know everything, what we do know, and part and parcel of good education and learning, is an understanding of the way things tend to work. And the way that we tend to learn and the way we tend to be very successful as a species is that we spot patterns. And if something seems to follow the same pattern, then instinctively, or you could say we intuit, that this thing we're now encountering we haven't seen before, but because it's got things in common with something we have, it probably follows the same pattern. And it's all pattern recognition. So a lot of the time we can make an informed judgment about what will probably be the way something works or how something will happen or what will be the outcome, because the pattern appears to be the same. And so that, I think, is what's being hinted at here. Intuition, instinct, is that we spot things that are common. They marry up with experiences we've had or learned about in the past, and there's enough in common that we think this seems so similar, I'm going to assume it's going to probably operate the same way. So it's a bit like if you buy a television and the remote control isn't exactly the same, it's a different make, but the buttons look quite similar and the menu system on your other TV worked one way, well, this one's probably going to be the same, or with the mobile phone, same story. So we apply the pattern we've learned from one thing through similarities to the new thing, and that's what we call instinct or intuition. There's nothing magical going on. It's the way your brain works. It's looking for patterns and then making predictions based on past knowledge and experiences.
Okay, let's go to Jeff. Jeff has an interesting question in for the naked scientist. One hears of many organs being transplanted nowadays, but never a pancreas. Why is that?
Well, Jeff, we do pancreas transplants, and you can either do partial pancreas transplants where a person gives a piece of pancreas, or you can do the whole thing. And at my hospital where I work, we're one of the few centres in the world where we do what's called multivisceral transplants. So rather than just do the pancreas, because the plumbing is quite complicated, getting the anatomy and the blood vessels and everything right to marry up, what surgeons increasingly do is to take the whole thing, everything that's in your tummy, basically, all the intestines with the pancreas wired up into it, sometimes the liver as well, put the whole lot in one go, en bloc, as they call it. So we do this, but it's less common than, say, a kidney transplant. There are more reasons why a person's kidneys might clap out than their pancreas, although not exclusively. And as we go into the era of more people with diabetes stressing out their pancreas because they've had obesity, for example, this may become more common. But we do the pancreas as a transplant organ, and it is very effective at helping people to have a healthy body weight because of its exocrine function, its contribution to digestion, but also its endocrine function, its contribution to helping us regulate our blood sugars.
Thank you, Jeff. Hopefully your question is answered. Let's go to a voice note. Joe, do we have more?
Hi, Clarence and Dr. Chris. It's Logan here from Edenville. My question is about the little asteroid moon that's orbiting Earth pretty soon. And it will be like in Earth's orbit for the next couple of months. would it not be in our interest to maybe try and capture it and mine it and see what minerals or what it's made up of? It
Uh,
could be seriously valuable information.
Hi, Logan. Well, we could do if it was worth it, but what 2024 PT5, which is the sexily and alluringly named new moon we're going to get from the 29th of September for a couple of months, what it actually measures across is about 10 metres. It's nothing, it's a speck. Researchers only just discovered this in recent weeks because we have a project to discover near-Earth asteroids or near-Earth objects that might pose a threat to Earth. This one, being very small, was picked up by that process. It's whizzing around at some 3,500 kilometres an hour, and it has come close to the Earth and been scooped up by our gravity well, which means it will come in, it will make a close flyby, a bit like a slingshot, and it will be taking about 2 months to do that. It's much farther away than our own moon is, so you won't be able to see this, and it will not complete one circuit of the Earth. It will go around in a sort of horseshoe and then disappear off into space again. We don't really know its origins. It seems to be some kind of asteroid or piece of asteroid. It might even be a bit of our own moon's surface, where something smashed into the moon way back when, ejected material, and that included this chunk, which is on a bizarre eccentric orbit, which means it does occasionally pass close enough for the Earth to grab it for a while and then sling it off. This is not a new phenomenon. It's happened a few times in recent history. So we do see this happening from time to time. We are not going to get a new bright light in the sky. We haven't got an amazing mineable resource because it's very small, but nevertheless very interesting.
Indeed. Let's check in on the other message.
The Clarence. Yeah, I've got a question. Why is it if you look at a light, like for instance the kettle's power light, it's blue. If you look at it, it doesn't flicker. But if you look to the side, it flickers. Strange, because if you look at it, it doesn't flicker. If you look to the side, it flickers. Why is that?
What a brilliant observation, and well done you for making it. I too have noticed this. You can also see this phenomenon in other light sources. And the reason is that your retina, which is the light sensitive sheet at the back of your eye, is not uniformly sensitive to light and colour and speed at which things move across its surface. The bit that we use to look at things like people's faces or a TV screen or read something, this strongly decodes colour and detail, and it's really good at that, but it works more slowly. Cones, which are doing that work much more slowly than peripherally in the retina. You have cells which are both rods and cones. There are fewer cones out there, but they work much faster. And they have bigger receptive fields, so they see with much less detail and accuracy, but they're really good at picking up change. And the purpose of that is that when something's coming in from the side, a projectile, an object you have to dodge out of the way of, someone's fist if they're trying to punch you, you need to see that. And so those cells in the periphery of your vision, because you don't look at someone's face and don't need detail, they sacrifice detail and acuity for speed of processing. So you see movement far faster from the periphery of your vision than centrally. And this is why when you look at that light, because those lights aren't on stably, they are actually flickering on and off with mains electricity, and the mains electricity is sending pulses because it's 50 hertz. It's flickering on and off 100 times a second. Your eye is sensitive to that flickering, and you are able to pick that up. And that's because you're seeing it from the periphery of your vision, where processing of movement and change is far faster.
Then a question for Dr. Chris. It reads, is one testicle able to reproduce enough sperm concentration after, I think it's pronounced orchidectomy?
Orchidectomy, yeah. An ectomy means taking something out, and orchis means testis, or testicle, or in other words, a ball. And the answer is yes.
Okay,
although we have two of them, and it is absolutely true.
It is qualified. It says due to torsion. I don't know if that means anything.
Well, when we are growing up, it's more common in boys than it is in older men. What can happen is a testis can occasionally twist on itself, not necessarily completely round, but it can turn on its axis because the testes dangle down inside the scrotum, the ball bag, on a system of tubes including blood vessels and the tubes that carry the sperms out of the testis. And if this rotates on its own axis of those tubes, it can pinch off the veins which are draining the blood out of the testicle, and this makes it very swollen because the blood can get in under arterial pressure but not out under low venous pressure, and this causes swelling and pain, and also then makes it even more likely to stay stuck. And this can have the effect of killing off the testicle because it deprives it of its blood supply. It's extremely painful. It's also a medical emergency. So if you suddenly develop, at any age actually, but it's more common in boys, if you suddenly develop a single hot, swollen, very tender testicle, do not sit on that, literally as well as metaphorically. Get medical assessment of that urgently, because if a surgeon goes in and is able to relieve it, they can fix it, and usually there's no problem. But occasionally, if you can't get help in time, or through embarrassment and other things like that, some people don't do anything about it, it can lead to the death of the testicle. Now, that is not a disaster, because if that one has to be removed, you do have another one. And in the same way that we have 2 kidneys, but you can be healthy with one, as long as the other one is still working okay, you can produce sperm from that other surviving testicle, and you should be fully fertile. There are some instances where sometimes if something goes wrong with one of them, it can cause an immune problem with the other one. So we want to avoid that, which is why I'm urging people, if you ever do get these sorts of symptoms, please do get it checked out very urgently. And the other reason that you can get problems with the testicle is because of, rarely, but it does happen, testicular cancer. So if you find lumps and bumps on a testicle, and you should always do self-examination when in the shower, that kind of thing. Sometimes you can encourage other partners to help too. And this was part of a government informational campaign about 20 years ago. It was called His Life.
It's Rhys James here, one of the producers at The Naked Scientists, and we, I guess, are doing a sort of Naked Scientist takeover of Ask, Chris, because, I mean, maybe you want to tell people what happened.
You're a bit embarrassing this. I'm really sorry, everybody. We've severed our Cape Town connection. Power cut. We think the really terrible weather just cut the power grid to this area, so had to go and get a generator out and keep the website alive, but it meant we did unceremoniously detach ourselves from Cape Talk. So I'm really sorry to everyone in South Africa who was denied the rest of that answer. What I was saying was that there's also an initiative going back about 20 years now. It was called His Life in Your Hands, which was encouraging young ladies to make sure that they felt their boyfriend's bits in the shower, not for the reason that's probably now springing through everyone's mind, but because that is a really sensitive way to find testicular cancer. Self-examination, really, really important. So that's another thing to bear in mind. But anyway, what I think, Rhys, we could do is, because we've now not got the rest of the programme, you guys, as our amazing star producers, can become the contributors of the questions.
That sounds like a great idea, Chris. I think we should probably introduce Will Tingle and James Titko, our other producers. Do you want to say hello, guys?
Hello, hello.
Hello. This is all a bit fun, isn't it?
It's great, and thanks to Chris's generator for keeping the lights on. Chris, given the awful weather we've been experiencing here in the UK, and I think it's much worse, or it has been much worse in Central Europe, some of the worst weather they've had, some of the worst rainfall they've had, I should say, in September on record. Is there any direct attributable link to climate change with all of this?
Yeah, this is like a peek behind the Naked Scientist curtain, all of this, or you sort of lift the lab coat on what goes on behind the scenes, isn't it? The answer is that it's really hard to say with all of this, because if you ask someone who's an expert on climate and on weather, and of course climate is what makes weather, and so one thinks about if there's a changing climate, will we see changing weather? What they will tell you is that the historical and geological record reveals to us that there's always been freak weather. We've always had severe storms. We've always had things that have caused dramatic floods, things that have caused enormous lightning storms, firestorms, whatever. That's always happened. But what we are beginning to see, based on our understanding of the past, is that those things are happening with a greater frequency and with a greater intensity. And that kind of stacks up with the physics too, because if you think about what drives weather and drives storms and rainfall and so on, the more energy that the planet has, and specifically the more heat there is in the atmosphere, heat energy, that means you can carry more water, so you can drop more rain. You can have higher lower pressures because there's more warm water evaporating off of the ocean surface to drive pressure differentials and winds, so you can have stronger storms, and that means you can have more intense storms as well. So our kind of prediction is that with climate change, we, having always seen freak weather, will probably see even more freak weather and even freakier freak weather. So it's going to happen more often and it's going to happen worse. And the wet bits of Earth are probably going to get wetter, the dry bits of Earth are probably going to get drier, and that may actually lead to maybe a halving of the amount of land there is for us to live on that is actually still a nice place to live in the future. Let's hope not, but that's certainly within the confidence intervals of what we think could happen to the world's weather in the future.
So perversely then, more energy kicking around, more need for that generator to keep the naked scientists on it.
Well, I think it's also ironic that I was very proud of the fact that we were running our website almost exclusively on green energy, because I've got solar panels and they generate enough of a surplus to run all of the website and store some in a battery, which then runs the website overnight. But the weather's been so goddamn awful that we have actually been relying on buying it off the grid. And then, of course, the grid went off completely. So now we're back to fossil fuels and a diesel generator to keep the site going for a bit this morning. But hopefully the sun will shine again later on.
Back to the 1970s with the generator. James, do you want to fire Chris a question?
Well, yeah. Speaking of things being powered by diesel generators, not too long ago, I was on a fairground ride. It had been set up locally to me. And back when I was a kid, I used to love theme parks, roller coasters, these sorts of attractions. But going on this one just recently, it just gave me the most horrible feeling of dizziness and sickness. And I know as we get older, we get a bit more risk averse, but for me, that doesn't tell the whole story of just the complete 180 I've had in attraction to this sort of thrill seeking. And I was wondering if there was something kind of physiological going on to kind of explain it.
I was at the RAND show in Soweto, Johannesburg, a few years back, and they have a fairground. And I saw this ride that's the kind of thing that would have been my nirvana when I was a kid. Bit like you're saying, used to love that kind of. I saw this ride, I thought, I've got to go on that. And it looked horrendous. I think it was called a ripsaw or something like that, but it basically looked like a giant chainsaw. And where the chain is on the chainsaw were these little cars that went round. And not only did the chain go round on this long run, they also saw that the thing the chain was going round also rotated. So the cars are sort of spinning round in multiple degrees of freedom. And it took ages to load everyone on and off, because it's got to wind a car round like a cable car, it'll bubble, get the people out and put the next people in and strap them in. And there was I at the front of the queue, and this car comes around, and I had second thoughts, because the car opens and these three people get out, and there's this guy comes out, and he just looked like he was on another planet, because it was spinning. His world was clearly spinning. And I said, "Any good?" And he said, "It was so good, it was terrible." Or it was so terrible, it was so bad, it was good. I can't remember what he said. It was hilarious, because he was clearly, his eyes were still moving all over the place. And I thought, what have I let myself in for? And I had an experience not dissimilar to yours, James. And I used to love all this kind of stuff. And I thought, something's changed. It was a good ride, but boy, did I feel evil afterwards. And I think that part of this is, as we get older, your balance system, which is your vestibular apparatus in your ears, and on each side of your head, just inside, if you stick your finger in your ear canal, the bit you can put your finger into and wiggle, that is pointing straight at where your inner ear, which is connected to your balance vestibular system, is located. And on each side of your head, you have these tiny canals. Each of them is a little circle, bit like a horseshoe shape, and they're about the same size, each of them, as a 5p piece. And in those canals is a liquid, and projecting into the liquid are hairs which are connected to nerve cells. And when you move your head, and the little canals are organised at each 90 degrees to each other, so you've got one at X, one at Y, and one at Z orientation. And that means you can detect movement in any direction by different amounts. And your head moves and the fluid gets left behind transiently, so it presses on the hairs, deflects them. That then sends a signal to the nerve cell they're connected to, which then fires off a barrage of impulses into the brain. And this tells you which direction your head is moving in and how quickly and to what extent. And it's called your dynamic labyrinth. And that's how you basically keep your balance, because it tells your muscular system to move in the equal and opposite amount to that which your head is moving to try and keep you balanced. It does the same thing to your eyes, which is why when you're walking down the road, you can read a road sign in the distance. Despite the fact your body's moving all over the place, your eyes remain absolutely rock solid, because this system is telling your eyes where to move. Now, as we get older, the system kind of furs up a bit and you build up sludge in that system. You get material and other debris, bits of dead cells and so on, and they change the density of the liquid. They can also build up on the hairs and press on them a bit harder. And so as a result, we tend to get more exaggerated movement signals. And we also become more sensitive to our balance system saying we're moving in one direction and our eyes saying, well, we're not actually. We're moving in the opposite direction. And this adds up to a sickness signal. And for some reason, the body concludes that the best way to resolve this is to throw up. I'm not really sure why, but it is the best way to cure a sensation of giddiness is to be sick, apparently. But that's what our body does. There's one way to resolve it, and it's called an Epley manoeuvre. And this is named after the guy Epley who discovered this, because if you look at the anatomy of how these canals are all connected to each other, if you move your head in a specific sequence of movements from one side to the back, to the front, and then round to the other side, any rubbish that's accumulated in the system slowly tumbles from one canal into the next, and then drops down harmlessly into the very bottom where there's a sort of sump, and it can't get in the way down there. So if you're having this sort of thing and you are getting a bit giddy or you get vertigo from time to time, try an Epley manoeuvre. Look it up online, and this very simple sequence of movements, you can just do it lying on your bed at home. And this can often help to dislodge that rubbish, and it will reset the system a bit and can maybe restore your ability to go and enjoy fairground rides.
Wow. Well, I have to look it up because, as you say, I mean, it's something I'm a bit disappointed I've lost. So maybe that's the answer for me.
You can get back on that waltzer. Was it a waltzer that did it? Was it a waltzer or was it something else?
It was like, it had a frog in the middle, and we were just being like bounced up and down, and it moved in a circular motion. So it was, I think, the combination of the moving in a circle and also up and down violently.
And you forgot the 5 pints as well before that, which might have had something to do with it.
I certainly wasn't after a hot dog afterwards, let's put it that way.
And we've got a question about dizzy snails coming up this week, haven't we, I think, guys?
That's quite right, yeah. So tune in next time to Question of the Week to the answer
absolutely
to why.
I love that question. Because when you told me about that, and this person, I mean, I'm not going to spoil it, but this person said that, was it a snail was stuck onto his car on the wheel, and he drove a very long distance and the snail was still on. And he said, I felt a bit sorry for the snail. Do snails get dizzy having been spun on a car wheel over a very long journey? And you've answered the question this week, so...
Well, maybe the snail was practicing the Epley manoeuvre then, Chris. Who knows? We'll find out. Will, do you want to fire Chris a question?
Yeah, I guess continuing on the trend of being disappointed with your own bodily functions, I've been suffering from tinnitus for as long as I can remember. And I don't know what the inciting incident was, but I do remember someone once saying to me, it can happen, it can be induced during dental surgery. And I realized that I had 2 teeth removed when I got braces, and I don't objectively remember having it before then. I was wondering if you had any insight as to whether that's even remotely true.
Well, tinnitus is the ringing in the ears in the absence of any sound. It's effectively an auditory hallucination, and it's really common. About 1 person in 5 gets it, and the biggest risk factor is exposure to loud noise and age. So the older we get, and also the more we do in terms of noise exposure, particularly to very loud sounds, the higher our risk this is going to happen. And most people get it at some point to an extent. Tends to be made worse by infection, and also exposure to other loud sounds, which can then trigger it off and resensitize you to it. And it's very disabling. People who have this can get it in one ear, both ears. Sometimes it's a whistling sound, sometimes it's a grating noise. It can range. And the best way to deal with it actually is to try and zone out. I know that sounds easy to say and it's very hard to do, but because your brain is so good at focusing on things and then learning to look for them, if you try and suppress the thought of it, you actually make it worse. If you worry about it, you actually make it worse. And stress makes any kind of psychological or psychoacoustic problem worse. So trying to be calm and ignore and mask it out, often with low sounds that are of the same sort of frequency so you can't hear it, that can be quite effective, because the more you concentrate on it, the better you're going to get at spotting it, and you're going to make it worse. Now, one possible connection with dentistry, they shouldn't be going anywhere near the nerves that subserve hearing, because I know your anatomy reasonably well, Will, because I've worked with you. So I know you're not some kind of weird mutant, and there's no way they're going to drill into your ear unless they were doing some very radical dentistry, in which case they probably shouldn't be on the dental register. But the drill does make a high-frequency whizzing, screaming noise. It could be quite similar to a tinnitus sound, and that could lead you to connect in your mind one with the other and think that was the causative thing because they sound the same. You started to notice it around that time. The most likely explanation is you have been exposed to some loud sounds. Perhaps you've worn headphones that were very loud, and there's health warnings now being circulated about people wearing in-ear headphones, earbud type things, because those do lead to extremely high sound pressure levels in the auditory canal. This is sufficient to damage your cochlea, which is the organ that turns the sound waves into the brain waves effectively. Because what we think is happening with a dose of tinnitus is that the cochlea, which is this sound-sensitive organ in your ear, has along its length nerve cells, again with hairs that project into a fluid, which are sensitive to different frequencies at different points along the length of the cochlea. And if you're exposed to very high levels of sound of a certain set of frequencies, it's effectively damaged the nerve hair cells in that region, so you get a flat spot in your ability to detect sounds corresponding to that frequency. So when the brain gets the signal that says, this is what I'm hearing, it doesn't hear sounds corresponding to a certain frequency. And in the same way as in the old days with radio, where if the station was a bit quiet and muffled, you'd just turn the volume up so you could hear it better, and you'd bring up the hiss to go with. In other words, you amplify the noise. Because the brain turns up the volume trying to hear the missing frequencies that are no longer coming in from the ears, it amplifies the noise in the system as well. And that's possibly what tinnitus is. And so that's why trying not to focus on it, to persuade your brain not to amplify the sound, is probably the best way to avoid having more of a problem. But it's less likely that it was the dentistry than that it was the dentistry.
Well, if it's all the same to you, then I think I'd like to go take my headphones off right now.
Yeah, don't turn them up too loud.
No raves for you this weekend, Will.
Ah, my plan's spoiled.
Speaking of which, what have you guys all got planned this weekend?
Well, the weather's looking like it might be decent for the last time in a little while, I predict. So making sure I get outside, basically, and soaking it up before the winter sets in.
Lovely. Chris, what have you got planned?
Yeah, much like James, actually. Going to try and make some vitamin D, because it is going to be sunny. And you know what they say, once your shadow is longer than you are no longer making any vitamin D. And we make 80% of our vitamin D through exposure to sunshine. And most people in high latitudes like the UK end up chronically vitamin D deficient by the end of winter. So make the most to try and see a bit of sunshine. Don't get burnt, obviously, but it is supposed to be better weather this weekend. So I'm going to go to my local agricultural fair, because that usually coincides with the last decent weather weekend we get before it gets really horrible. So I'm going to go to that.
Will there be any rides, Chris?
Well, what, tractor rides and things like that? Well, people have said, would I like to take my tractor? And I've said, it's a bit of a long way to cart the tractor down there. But I do see some of my friends who've got vintage tractors, and they usually turn up, and then maybe they'll give me a go. I don't know. I'll ask.
Lovely. Well, and what have you got planned?
Oh, I'll be going to a rave. No, I'll be in a hide in a river trying to take photos of small birds that no one's interested in.
Good luck.
Good luck, Will. I think that's a wrap then. Thanks for listening. And yeah, I think we've explained pretty well why Chris's generator's been in full flow today. We've not been able to kind of deliver you ask as always, but I hope we've answered a few questions for you. Goodbye from me. Will, goodbye from you.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye from James.
me.
And goodbye from me. And of course, you can subscribe to our podcast for Ask the Naked Scientist, if you don't already, at nakedscientist.com/ask. And you can get about 16 years worth of back catalogue of this programme there as well. And there's a button to click if you'd like to ask us any questions. And our sincere apologies in the meantime to our South African listeners who were unceremoniously disconnected earlier today. But we hope that this alternate version of the programme will make up for it. Have a great weekend, everyone, and thanks, guys, for stepping in and continuing the conversation.
Been a pleasure.
Yeah, cheers, Chris.